Thank you.
Andrew, good.
What's up, man?
No.
Well, he's not up. I had David Jarman already.
Is there a phone?
We're going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to go ahead and start with some housekeeping announcements.
Good morning. The TTAC meeting today is being live streamed and available for viewing on the Regional Connection YouTube channel. To make sure that the viewers who are listening into the live stream can hear you, we ask that you please turn on and speak directly into the microphone when you need to provide any inputs or comments. Please do the same when providing a motion or seconding the motion. We do ask that you turn off your microphones once you're done speaking. If there are any on-site non-working participants who want a social distance, the live stream is available in the 757 room of the building. For people who don't know where that is, it's right behind the reception area. We do request that if you're a TTAC or ICG voting member or would like to be here to provide any specific comments or ask any questions, you please remain in this room. Viewers in the 757 room will not be able to participate. They just allow you to view the meeting. Your comments and votes from the 757 room will not be recorded or counted. And then finally, as you all notice, there's a difference in the way we've set up today. To help with social distancing, we've made placards of TTAC ICG member localities and agencies around the table rather than individual name tags. This is based on the feedback we received at the October TTAC meeting and to help ensure that each TTAC member locality or agency is represented on the table. So just wanted to bring those to your attention. Thank you very much.
As we move forward, we'd also like to call your attention to item 9 on the agenda. Within the TTAC meeting this month, we're also going to be holding an ICG or Interagency Consultation Group meeting. We would ask that our TTAC members be patient as we come to item 9. We're going to briefly suspend the TTAC meeting, convene the ICG meeting, go through those items, and then we'll end the ICG meeting and reconvene the TTAC meeting to finish our business. That'll all happen in this room at the table. We'll go through that when we get to that item in the agenda. It'll just take a few minutes. And if there's any public comment regarding the ICG items or any other items on the agenda, those will all be handled under the public comment period under item 9. So that all needs to be handled under under item 4. All public comment on any of the items of the agenda, including item 9, should be handled under the regular public comment on item 4. So if there's any questions about that, we can answer them now, or we'll go ahead and get started on the rest of the agenda. Okay, moving forward, are there any introductions anyone would like to make from the table at this point? Okay, I don't see any. Item 3, looking at approval of agenda, we've had a request to move item 15, which is the Bowers Hill Interchange Study Update. We've been asked to move that up to item 11, right after item 10, so that can be taken care of by the presenter. If there aren't any objections, can I get a motion to approve that change as part of approval of the agenda?
So moved.
We have a motion motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved with that change. The next is item number 4, public comment. I don't believe we received any written public comment. Was there any public comment here at the meeting? I'm not seeing any public comment. And I'm not seeing that we've had any submitted public comment. That moves us to item number 6, submitted updates and comments from our state and federal agencies and military partners. Do you want to just go around?
Thank you, Navy, that's for the group today, thanks.
If we could just go around the table, I'm not sure where everybody's at this meeting.
Good morning. I did have a quick update for the group. For those of you that were able to attend the VDOT's local program workshop last week in Norfolk, you heard our commissioner say, and also prior to that at the October Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting, you heard our Deputy Secretary of Transportation also mentioned some possible good news. It looks like the FY21 collections of revenue is actually a little higher than what was initially projected. So that does mean we may have some additional funding to be able to help program additional projects. We're currently looking at the round 4 smart scale projects as they were ranked and looking down the list to see which additional projects we could potentially fund with priority transportation funding. We're hoping to have a recommended scenario to present to the CPB at their December 8th meeting, but we're meeting with our Commonwealth Transportation Board members right now to go through that list. Also discussed was a possibility of moving the revenue sharing allocations up. Currently, for the previous round and the current round, the revenue sharing allocations are proposed for years 5 and 6 of the 6-year plan. It's actually looking like we might be able to move that up to years 3 and 4 of the 6-year plan. So again, that would be for potentially the previous round and the current round right now that we're actually scoring. So more to come on that. We really won't know the true revenue projections until the December forecast, but as of right now, it's looking much better. So more to come, and certainly have some more updates for you all here soon.
Good morning, everyone. Grant Sparks, Drpt. Later on in the agenda, I'm going to give an update on the transit equity and modernization study. So I'll hold off on that update, but a quick update on DRPT's Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP program. In October, we presented to the Commonwealth Transportation Board on DRPT's draft recommendations for the first round of funding. There were 2 sub-programs under this TRIP program, one to fund zero fare pilot projects for transit systems, and then the other sub-program was to fund regional transit routes. Of note for this group, HRT was in the draft funding scenario for the regional routes sub-program. We recommended funding their naval-based circulator service to increase on-base circulation. The funding for that, I believe, is just shy of $2.5 million over the next 3 years. We will be looking for approval later on from the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Thank you.
Why? Any updates? Okay, so moving on, we've got several items on our consent agenda. Looks like we have some minutes and also several TIP amendments. Does anyone have any questions on the items on the consent agenda? If there are no questions, I'll take a motion.
Motion to approve.
there's a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion approved. That moves us to item number 8. I believe Dale's going to give us an update on the long-range transportation plan.
Good morning, everyone. On your agenda, there's 3 items related to conformity. So this is the first one. So we are conducting a regional conformity assessment on the amended 2045 LRTP and FY 21-24 Transportation Improvement Program. So as you recall, last month, we did have 3 amendments to the LRTP. These amendments were approved by the board on October 21st. This is the reason for the regional conformity assessment. And just as a reminder, this is the 64-464 interchange improvements, the St. Paul's Project Phase 2, and then Godwin Boulevard. So these amendments are documented in a report. This is the 2045 LRTP Amendments Report, and we're also using this report to maintain a current list of projects. So this will be available on our website, actually already is available. So as you all know, transportation or air quality conformity is the link between air quality planning and transportation planning, and it's a way to ensure that transportation projects do not worsen air quality in the region. In terms of air quality conformity, Hampton Roads is in attainment for all applicable national ambient air quality standards. Previously, Hampton Roads was in maintenance for a less stringent ozone NAICS, and as such, we are considered an orphan maintenance area. Chris Voigt will be covering a lot of this, so I don't want to steal a lot of his thunder for these conformity requirements. But the short of it is that we are subjected to substantially streamlined conformity requirements in Hampton Roads. The important note on this slide is that once we start conformity, we will not consider any additional LRTP amendments unless they are clearly conformity exempt. And really, beyond that, we don't want to be doing conformity every few months. So we have a policy that we generally do not do conformity more than twice a year unless there's a strong reason to do it more frequently than that. So this is our schedule, and Chris Voigt will go over this in his presentation, but today we'll be kicking off conformity. And then, so November 3rd, so for this agenda item, we're actually approving the conformity list. And then you'll see some of the future items on this slide. The board will approve the regional conformity assessment, and then the federal government has a certain amount of time to approve the conformity assessment. So the recommended action today for you on this agenda item is to approve the list of regionally significant projects for the amended 2045 LRTP and FY 21-24 TIP regional conformity assessment. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dale. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at the list that was in the report that TTAC provided. Did anyone have any questions for Dale?
Okay. I do have one question. In light of what Todd was sharing with us earlier about the action of the CTB or proposed action to the CTB that's going to bring some additional projects to Hampton Roads, how does that fit into this? Are we going to end up having to do this again in 3 or 4 months because of these new projects? Can we delay this and roll those in? Where does that leave us, Dave?
So we wouldn't delay this conformity assessment. I think there's a time issue with 64-464. So we'd have to look at what those additional projects would be coming to the region. Some of them might not trigger conformity. If they do, our preference is to hold them all and wait 6 months. But again, if there's something in there that's going to be a time critical, then we can come before the TTAC and do, discuss conformity again.
Thank you.
I would assume in that case, they would kind of drop as a group. So if we did need to do them, we can look at them as a group. If we move up the 6 month, it would still be in a package.
And I'd ask Mr. Halsey that I would assume that that is correct. These will probably be approved as a package by the board at some future date.
Yes, that's correct. We're hoping that it's approved in December, but it could be delayed a month or two.
And just to add, with the CTA action, that in and of itself does not trigger conformity. We'd be looking at, construction start dates, things like that, as to why we would need to rush another conformity.
Were there any other questions? If there are no other questions, would someone like to make a motion?
Move the approval as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. At this point, we'd like to pause the TTAC meeting. We're going to ask that the TTAC members just stay in the room with us for a few minutes while we go ahead and convene the ICG meeting and handle the ICG business. We're going to shift seats a little bit here for a moment. I believe we've already confirmed that we do have an ICG quorum, so we'd like to call the ICG meeting to order. The ICG item of business is agenda item 9, interagency consultation group meeting. And our item is a presentation by Mr. Christopher Boyd from DTAC.
Good morning. This is another routine regional conformity assessment. There's 2 presentations. The first one is consultation for conformity, and the second one is approval of the conformity assessment. So in this first presentation, I'll go over the membership of the ICG group, the criteria for the conformity assessment, the project list and schedule, and move to the ICG actions. This is the current ICG member list as updated by TPO in the last few weeks. The members shown on this slide are the ones I'll be voting at the end of this presentation on the requested actions, which are shown on the TTAC agenda. If any other changes to the membership are needed, please advise TPO staff. This kind of busy slide shows the criteria for the conformity assessment. On the left are the criteria specified in the EPA conformity rule, the federal rule. On the right are the additional criteria specified, self-imposed, in effect by the Hampton Roads Ict Consultation Group in the procedures in 2005. The red marked items are the ones that have been eliminated from applicability for Hampton Roads because of the South Coast 2 rulings that I think Dale mentioned, which led to the elimination of emission modeling requirements by EPA guidance. And also this region did not include transportation control measures or TCMs in their air quality plan that was previously applicable for this region. So the only federal criteria that remain are consultation and fiscal constraint, and the only local criteria remain are consultation of project list and the conformity schedule. Fiscal constraint is a financial assessment, not air quality assessment, so it's met in the conformity assessment simply by reference to TPO documentation of fiscal constraint. The conformity assessment does not include any independent assessment of fiscal constraint. Moving on to the 2 ICG consultation items. First, the project list, which Dale mentioned already. We also included a copy of that project list in Appendix C, which is the last appendix in the draft conformity assessment. And that's online at TPO website at the address shown at the top of this slide. Conformity schedule, Dale already presented. We have today's ICG meeting. We have public review period, public consultation, following TPO procedures, spanning 2 weeks from the 27th of October to November 9th. We're scheduled for approval of the draft RCA at the next meeting, November 18th, and then the federal review and approval process for finding of conformity. That's their terminology for it. Would begin then. It's nominally 45 days, or maybe less, or maybe a bit longer. All right, these are the requested ICG approvals. This is for members, as I showed you on the previous membership list, the slide showing the membership list. And they're also shown in the agenda. So we could have a vote on these actions.
Okay, so in your package, in your agenda, you'll see the two recommended actions held. One is approval of the draft conformity schedule, which was attached in your package, and the other is approval of a list of regionally significant projects for conformity. Were there any questions regarding the presentation or the action before us? Are there any questions for Dale or for VDOT at this point? If there aren't any questions, my understanding is that we can make a motion for both of these actions in one motion, as long as we mention both actions within the motion itself, if anyone wanted to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval for what's listed on the other screen.
We have a motion.
I'd like to second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. With that action, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the ICG meeting. That was fairly painless. We're now going to reconvene the TTAC meeting. I don't think anyone slipped out in the interim, so we should still have a TTAC forum, and we're going to move on with agenda item 10.
Okay, thank you. In the past, we had to do emission modeling. This presentation we did it 2 or 3 months after the ICG meeting, because it'll take us 2 or 3 months to do the network and emission modeling for the conformity assessment. In the absence of those emission modeling requirements, we can just go straight to the recommendation of approval to approve the draft RCA. It's already presented. The draft RCA documents that we met the conformity criteria for fiscal constraint and consultation. The consultation is detailed in Appendix A of the draft RCA and includes the consultation for fiscal constraint, project list, and conformity schedule. So we can move directly to the proposed conformity finding for the draft RCA as all applicable conformity criteria met. Our conformity finding is supported, subject to no adverse comment in public review. The public review started last week, but the release of the TTAC agenda and it extends through next week, November 9th. And so the requested TTAC action, this is TTAC, not ICT, is to recommend board approval of the draft RCA proposed finding conformity for the plan and TIP, subject to no adverse comments received in the public review period. If any comments are received in the next week, they'll be made us in the TPO meeting. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions before we move forward? If not, do we have a motion?
I would move the recommendation to the HRTPO board of approval of the draft regional conformity assessment as noted on the screen.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. At this point, we're moving on to agenda item 11. However, this is where we've made a change, so it's actually agenda item 15. We'll be that forward. They'll be presenting the power cylinder.
VDOT Environmental, here to provide an update on the Bowersville Interchange Improvement Study that's being documented in an environmental impact statement. The goal of the presentation today is to help inform this group so that you in turn can inform your policy board, in which we'll seek action to endorse the recommended preferred alternative early next year. We'll get to that timeline here later in the presentation. First, walk you through a little bit of the background on the study and its findings. So as I mentioned, we're documenting the current study in an environmental impact statement, or EIS. The Bowersville study began as an environmental assessment, or EA. It was made available to the public in April of 2019. During the public review of that document, that's in the Hampton Roads Express Lane Network, began to be discussed publicly and incorporated into planning documents. And HRTPO modified the Bowersville Interchange Improvement Study to not only include the interchange, but extend up 664 to the College Drive interchange. That was done in part to acknowledge and consider the Hampton Roads Express Lane Network, and also done based on the preliminary traffic analysis that was included in the EA, which suggested the need for improvements to the interchange, extended further up the main line. So with that action by HRTPO, early last year, VDOT opened discussions with Federal Highway about expanding the scope of the study, and given the area we were talking about, also agreed that an EIS was the appropriate level of documentation to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. Just real quick, you all are very familiar with the area, but the yellow highlight illustrates the study area and addressing the interchanges that are being looked at. Today I'll speak generally to all of 664, but not lose sight of the fact that all of the improvements we're talking about include fully addressing the Bowersville interchange. So for those of you familiar with the NEPA process, one of the first steps is identifying the purpose and need. And the purpose and need serves as the primary criteria in the alternative screening process, and also establishes the goals for the study. Using our current NEPA practice, that includes getting concurrence from federal agencies involved in the study. So what you see on the screen today has been presented to the public. We received approximately 1,300 public comments supporting or informing this statement, and the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers concurred on this statement, saying the goals for the study. So next, we'll roll into the range of alternatives that were considered. I'll first brief on those that did not meet the purpose and need. So these are not being retained for further consideration in this study. And before I do, let's take a step back. There's 3 bullets at the bottom are the need elements that are most important to focus on. So these alternatives need to reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and provide additional travel choice. As we worked our way through the study, that travel choice need became the most dominant. Had a number of comments from HRTPO and the localities during our monthly meetings with the agencies, making sure that that travel choice included transit plans for the corridor, and also acknowledged regional plans, including the Hampton Roads Express Lane Network. So as we work through these alternatives, we need to keep in mind reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and provide additional travel choice. So the first option that was considered was to add 1 general purpose lane in each direction and improve the Bowersville interchange. It was determined that adding a general purpose lane would not improve travel choice, as it would continue to maintain the same general purpose setup we have today. So that was not retained for a detailed study. Another option was 2 general purpose lanes, and likewise, that did not provide the travel choice that the study was looking for. The next option was to establish collector and distributor lanes at the major interchanges along 664, and also reconstruct the Bowersville interchange. On its own, CD lanes do not meet the purpose and needs, so they are not retained as a standalone alternative. That does not preclude them from being considered as part of a design package in the future for select interchanges. The next option was to make transit-only improvements, which in this case would primarily be adding additional bus service on the corridor, which we understand is already being considered. Simply adding additional buses to the corridor would not improve travel time or reduce congestion in itself. So it's not retained as a standalone alternative. That does not preclude transit improvements from being made as part of the overall construction of this project or standalone project in the future. And then the last option that was not retained is a transportation system management and transportation demand management, or TSM-TDM option. We were fortunate that as we started this study, VDOT was at the same time conducting a separate study, the I-64-664 corridor improvement plan, which was looking to identify these types of improvements along all of 64 and 664. So we're able to look to see what they were recommending within our study area. And those recommendations are limited to extending one acceleration-deceleration lane, which would not adjust the purpose of need, and enhancing the transit on the corridor, which we've already covered, would not adjust the purpose of need. So as a standalone option, the TSM-TDM was not retained. Much like transit, that does not preclude it from being applied to a preferred alternative or being added as separate projects in the future. So for example, park and ride lots would fall into this bucket. And while we're not including them as part of one of the alternatives we'll consider, park and ride lots, of course, could be established as part of the construction package or standalone projects in the future. So this handful of options, again, will not advance consideration as preferred. They will be fully documented in the EIS. I explained maybe better than I just did how they did not meet the purpose and need. We also took a look at rail as part of the study. Beyond just our general desire to do so, the General Assembly in their 2020 budget bill directed that any agency who looks at improvements along 664 should consider how rail could be considered on the south side of 664. So as we began to develop the options I just reviewed, we also began to work with Drpt, Port of Virginia, to look at the corridor and to determine if rail could fit. VDOT is not the rail expert, so we relied on Drpt to provide us with typical sections for a single track or a double track would look like running through the corridor. And we found that south of the area where rail already exists, there is not room for rail to fit within the median. You'd have to pretty significantly bump out the existing interstate to make that happen. So we found that it would not fit. Neither Drpt nor Port of Virginia disagreed with that finding. And so we advanced further into our study, assuming that rail would not be part of the median. And therefore, we can assume that our improvements could widen to the median. The only place where that's not the case is where rail already exists. There is the potential you can fit rail, expanded rail, and a new roadway all in the median. Unfortunately, at the NEPA level, we don't get to that level of detail. So for the purposes of the study, we assume widening to the inside where there is no rail and widening to the outside where there is existing rail. Again, as I just said, in the future, maybe you can fit it all in the middle, maybe you can't. We look for a worst case scenario at NEPA, which I'll get into a little bit later. So the worst case scenario would be you can't fit road and rail in the median, so it's on the outside there. Moving ahead. Alternatives retained for detailed study, and I should have mentioned earlier, much like the purpose and need, all of these options were presented to the public in February and March of this year. Given the state of the world, that was done virtually, but we had almost a 45-day period where folks could go online, review the different options. There was a narrated PowerPoint which walked them through all that, and then an opportunity to comment. Those comments were brought before our agencies, and again, we received concurrence, much like the purpose and need, from the Army Corps and the EPA on the range of alternatives to be retained. The first alternative to be retained is the no build, which is required under NEPA, provides a means of comparison for the build alternatives. The next build alternative considered is to add one unmanaged lane and a part-time drivable shoulder in each direction. That includes improving the Bowersville interchange and potentially improving the other interchanges along 664. You'll note on the illustrative typical section of the screen, we're showing the widening of new lanes to the inside. Like I mentioned before, that's a general assumption being made, but post-NEPA, a more detailed design will determine where everything falls in. There's certainly not enough room to keep everything in the median. Some work will push to the outside a bit, and we'll get to that in a few minutes also. The other build alternative under consideration was to add 2 managed lanes in each direction and those same interchange improvements that were on the first. Again, assuming we're widening to the inside to the greatest extent practicable. So these are draft. These are certainly preliminary, as the slide says, but it's enough information now for us to begin making our recommendation for a preferred alternative. Walk through some of these. Those of you who are familiar with the corridor, there's a lot of private property built up right alongside 664. In many cases, there are residences and buildings right alongside 664. In NEPA, we assume a worst case scenario. We also assume a standard impact scenario. So what I mean by that is don't attempt to dodge too many resources to find that worst case scenario. We have a standard offset. In this case, it's 30 feet off of the improvements. So you have your typical section, and then we buffer out 30 feet on each side. That allows us to consider stormwater management basins, sound walls, construction access, and other temporary impacts. Of course, that won't occur everywhere, but it's far better in the NEPA process to have too many impacts and let people who are smarter and more intelligent than me bring those impacts down in the future than for us to have too few impacts and have to return to NEPA in the future. So again, you can take a look for yourself, but we're a high number of potential residential relocations, very high number of wetland impacts potentially out there. That whole corridor is wet. If there's not roadway there, it's wet right now. And a pretty extensive amount of streams as well. We'll highlight again, our cost estimates are preliminary at this point. They are still undergoing review by VDOT, and we'll then turn to our agencies and federal partners to review those costs as well. But we are in a place where we feel comfortable at least putting these numbers out as preliminary cost estimates. So there is some difference, but not a massive difference, I think, between the impacts and the costs are what you'd expect them to be, I think, in terms of adding an additional lane versus a drivable shoulder. In the NEPA process, we seek to balance cost, impact, and how we meet the purpose and need. So we have 2 alternatives now that meet the purpose and need in similar ways. We have 2 alternatives, one of which is more impactful to private property, more impactful to natural resources, and more costly. VDOT's recommended preferred alternative, which we'll spend the next few months discussing with our agencies and then presenting to the public beginning in mid-December, would be alternative C, to add 1 managed lane and a part-time drivable shoulder in each direction. As I just mentioned, the impacts are less, the cost is less, and it aligns with the Hampton Roads Express Lane network that is under construction right now as part of the high-rise bridge project. So as I mentioned at the beginning, when it comes to purpose and need and consistency with local plans, alternative C best meets the purpose and need. I touched on the schedule earlier, but put this in front of you now. We'll be back later this month to brief your policy board. We'll post information to our website for the public hearing beginning on December 17th. That's even earlier than we need to per VDOT's public policy manual, knowing that we're heading into the holiday season. We want to make sure everyone has time to look things over. Since this presentation was put together, the dates for our public hearing have changed a bit. We're currently looking at a January 27th in-person event and a January 26th virtual event. So beginning on the 17th, you'll be able to go online, the public will be able to go online, review all these materials, and comment. On the 26th of January, we'll invite them to join us virtually. And of course, anyone who wants to meet in person can come on the 27th. With the public comment period closed, we return to our agency group that we meet with every month and request concurrence on the recommended preferred alternative. That recommendation is not only based on the information I've presented today, but also all that public comment. Assuming the Army Corps and the EPA concur, we bring that information to the CTB as early as February of next year. And assuming we make their February workshop, would seek action from them in March to identify the preferred alternative. If we hit all those marks, the draft EIS would be issued by Federal Highway no later than next September, and study complete spring of 2023. I know I've moved through that pretty quickly, but thank you all for your time and welcome any questions or comments you might have.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for your presentation and all the work that you've done on the study. And I appreciate you talking about the TEM and transit, even though we did make a final cut, how this project doesn't preclude those improvements in the corridor. I was wondering if you could talk anything about the interchange itself and any designs or proposals for improving the interchange.
Sure. So for those of you who were part of or were around a couple of years ago when we were doing the EA study, we did what was then referred to as Interchange Modification Report, or IMR, as part of the study that was required at the time by Federal Highway. And that is the level of engineering and traffic you need to go to investigate how to improve an interchange, especially one as complex as Bowers Hill. That study proposed two different options to improve. One was a total reconstruct of the interchange. The other was adding new lanes, and separating some of those lanes to better move traffic through the interchange. That IMR did not consider express lanes or managed lanes coming through. So when that was added to this study, when we began EIS, we, for lack of a better term, had to throw out the old IMR and start over. Under today's rules, which seem to change frequently, Federal Highway does not require an IMR as part of NEPA. So there is no IMR or IAR, as they're now referred to, being developed alongside NEPA. So what we're doing, what we have done on the high-rise bridge and the HRTPO and other major NEPA studies, we're simply setting a footprint around the interchange. Once NEPA is complete, the region can advance with an IAR on your own schedule that will identify the specific improvements. We've, of course, had to make some assumptions just for the sake of impact analyses, air and noise, and you'll find that in the documentation when it comes out. But there's no commitments being made as to how the Bowers Hill interchange or any of the other interchanges will be improved as part of this study, just setting the path forward for this to happen.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions or comments? We appreciate the presentation. Moving back to the agenda, item number 12 is going to be 2021 Designated Air Quality Improvement Program Selection Process Allocation Update.
Yes, good morning. I'm here to present the results from the Transportation Programming Subcommittee for the annual process allocating congestion mitigation air quality CMAQ and Regional Surface Transportation Program RSTP dollars. These two funding programs are unique in that these are federal dollars that the regional HRTPO allocates directly in coordination with VDOT. Projects are evaluated and ranked and then allocated formally by the HRTPO board. This process is conducted annually so that the money is fully allocated through the 6-year plan of the state when it's updated each year. CMAQ program, as everyone knows, is related to air quality. and the RSTP has a greater range of flexibility in how these funds are used. Just a little background that this process over almost 2 decades has evolved into a very straightforward and extensive process involving both the public, then having localities and other agencies submit applications under established procedures. The HRTPO staff evaluates and scores these applications. The TPS subcommittee will then meet, review the project proposals, recommend allocations. The TTAC will then make its recommendation to the TPO board, and after the TPO board action, this will go forward to the state for programming, as I mentioned, into this next update to the state 6-year plan. So the 2021 allocation process was looking at funding for FY 2028, again, that 6-year plan horizon. And the funding marks in each program are shown in the tables, a little over 15 million in CMAQ and just over 37 million in RSTP. And these were the marks we've been carrying for a number of years. So funding has been fairly level to the region in both of these programs over the last several years. The issue that we had as we began looking at FY28 is what we call penciled in projects. These are projects that were scored, ranked, and funded in earlier cycles, but had funding needs and commitments in FY28 and out year, and therefore would be first considered for available funding. And looking at what the penciled in requirements were in FY28, you see that there was less than 2 million available in CMAQ, and we were 12.5 million overcommitted in RSTP. So early this year, the TPS met and decided upon 3 things: that new applications would not be accepted this cycle, given the level of commitment to existing projects, that we always look to finish projects that we've started and fully fund them before starting new, that all available FY28 CMAQ and RSTP funding would only go to the penciled in list. And then number 3, with the exception that if the committee will remember earlier this year, because of the way the FAST Act was extended in continuing resolutions, there were some reductions to CMAQ projects that removed some funding. And so the TPS recommended that those projects impacted by the reductions in FAST Act could be considered in FY28 funding, trying to make them back whole to where they were prior to the reductions. So looking at that, came up with a recommended list of allocations. This is half of table 1 on CMAQ, and going to the second half, you see 21 total projects receiving the full 15.361 million in allocations. And this, as I said, mixes both the penciled in as well as the FAST Act reductions, which we're able to fully accommodate all of those reductions, with the exception of the project number 21 at the bottom line, still has available funding needs above the 852,000 that was allocated. So that would be in FY29 or later to make that project whole. On the RSTP side, a smaller list of 8 projects were recommended to receive the available FY28 allocations, and that totaled, again, to the full 37 million that was available. And you see how they're spread across both transit and highway needs throughout the region, with several projects, about half of them should be fully funded with the FY28 allocations. And so the recommended action to the TTAC today is to recommend to the board that the FY28 CMAQ and RSTP project allocations as shown in table 22 be approved and recommended forward to the state for programming. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. I know the TPS committee works really hard to make this list work out. Some of those meetings go very long. Did anyone have any questions or concerns? Or was there any discussion on the information provided in the agenda? If there isn't, can I get a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
There's a motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are at item 13, which is our tip snapshot.
Good morning, everyone. Before I get started, I just want to let you know that we have a lot going on this morning, and I forgot to print the attendance sheets. So I wrote everybody down who is sitting at the table, and Bashoy helped me get everybody who is not at the table, so I just want to let you know that we've got that covered. Okay, today I am here to present the tip snapshot, and this presentation was actually supposed to occur in September, but as we know, it was canceled. So the data is a little lagging. I will be presenting an update again in January, and that will have more current data. So the HRTPO is charged with maintaining the TIP per federal regulations, and we create the TIP snapshot by using data that we get from VDOT and our transit agencies. And the TIP is important, and I want to explain this because I know we do have new TTAC numbers. The TIP is important because there's never enough funding for all the transportation needs in the area. And the majority of the funding is from federal and state revenue. And so we allow the public to have their input because it is federal and state funding. And the TIP provides extensive information on each project. If you go through the TIP, you will see that there is a project sheet on each individual project. And it has cost estimate, it has funding allocations, the obligations, and the expenditures on the projects along with schedules. The snapshot provides a review of phase and total project expenditures, updates on the regional priority projects that are under construction, and CMAQ and RSTP stalled projects. Right here you will see I have a quick stats slide. The graphic that you see is something that HRTPO staff produces for the board, and for our website, it's a 2-page summary. And on this 2-page summary, it does have that we have $365.5 million expended on 111 projects. Note that this is from January through March of 2021. 74 projects have PE expenditures, 18 projects with right-of-way expenditures, 46 projects with construction expenditures. Also, for October 2020 through March of 2021, there are currently 52 CMAQ and RST projects that we have flagged that had no expenditures during those 2 quarters. When we look at the stalled projects, we do look at 2 quarters. The pie chart right here shows the expenditures, again, January through March of 2021. As you can see, 95% is represented with construction, which is great news because that means that the projects are moving forward. Regional priority projects. These are the ones that are currently under construction. And the data that is illustrated is from March 19th, 2021. This first slide shows the segment 3 of the I-64 Peninsula widening, along with the phase 2 of the 64-264 interchange improvements, phase 2. These two projects are almost complete, and they are scheduled to be open to the public by the end of the year. This next slide shows phase 1 of the 64 South Side widening, which includes the high-rise bridge and also the HRTP expansion project. And construction is moving forward with both of those. The high-rise bridge and South Side widening should be complete by the end of 2022, and the HRTP has just gotten started. Boring, as was presented by Jim Utterbag, should begin in August of 2022, with completion scheduled for the end of 2025. And lastly, under construction is the Express Lane Segment 2, which is to be completed in October of 2022. With each tip snapshot, we pick a project to highlight that is under construction. And this tip snapshot, we are highlighting the Laskin Road Phase 1A project in Virginia Beach. And the scope of the project is to construct an 8-lane divided highway along Laskin Road from the Republic Road to Freemat Drive. And by doing so, this will remove the feeder lanes. And also, it includes construction of 6-lane divided highway on First Colonial Road from Laurel Lane to I-264. And the cost estimate is currently at approximately $56 million, and it will greatly increase the flow of traffic in this area. The project is scheduled for completion in August of 2023. With each snapshot, we also highlight projects that had significant expenditures, and by significant, we mean over $1 million in a particular quarter, which is the January through March of 2021. There were a total of 13 projects during that quarter, and just to highlight a few of them, the top 4 are the expansion of the HRTP, the phase 1 of the 64 South Side widening and high-rise bridge, segment 3 of the peninsula widening, and the I-264 Wichita Road interchange and ramp improvements. And as you can see, the rest of the projects on this list, which includes this slide too, are scattered throughout the region. Projects with first expenditures in preliminary engineering, there were 6 of them, 2 of them sidewalk projects, and the other are signal timing projects. For right-of-way first expenditures, we have 2 projects, one in Suffolk and one in James City County. Actually, 2 in James City County. During that time, there were no first expenditures in any construction projects. So this slide represents the active CMEC and RSTP projects with no expenditures for those 2 quarters. Normally, what I do is I would analyze these stalled projects, and in this presentation, we would let you know how many are canceled, delayed, how many are completed. But we are currently working with VDOT now on how to obtain this information because we can no longer access that on our own. So we're working with them to have that included going forward in these presentations. Our next steps will be to continue to monitor the projects. We will also, after we get with VDOT on which ones are completed, canceled, delayed, I will reach out to the localities and agencies that have stalled projects to determine how to move them forward, or whether we want to perhaps reallocate those funds to any other projects. And that is my formal presentation. Does anyone have any comments, questions?
Any questions or comments? Thank you. Our next item is a study update from DRPT.
Morning, everyone. Grant Sparks, Director of Transit Planning with Drpt. And this morning I will be giving you a brief overview and an update on an important initiative that Drpt is undertaking that focuses on transit equity and modernization. The Virginia Transit Equity and Modernization Study does have the potential to have some fairly significant impacts on how DRPT allocates funding and how we include policies in our processes. So it is very important that we get input from our transit agencies, transit riders, MPOs, and other stakeholders throughout the study development process. So thank you for inviting me to present today. So first, how did we get here? This past January, House Joint Resolution 542 passed in the General Assembly with wide range of support from stakeholders. This resolution requires DRPT to develop a needs assessment and develop recommendations to advance transit equity and modernization efforts in Virginia. Additionally, the resolution requires that an emphasis be placed on engagement opportunities for underserved and underrepresented communities. The resolution also, in addition to equity and modernization, calls out 6 topic areas that we must address throughout the study development process. Those 6 topics being transit accessibility, the adequacy of transit infrastructure, transit electrification, emerging technologies in transit, transit safety, and transit system engagement and governance. So in terms of the study goals, the first 2 are pretty straightforward. We will be identifying transit agency, rider, and stakeholder needs. We will also be developing an action plan to address those needs. And then the third goal is to define underrepresented and underserved communities. So not only define the characteristics of these communities, but also understand where these communities are located and how they are involved in the decision-making process for public transportation. So I mentioned those 6 topic areas. This slide just gives you an overview of some of the different strategies and analyses that we will be performing. So just to highlight a few, we will be doing an opportunities and gap assessment of transit service and accessibility. So looking at transit supply versus demand throughout the Commonwealth. Additionally, here we will want to be looking at whether or not those service gaps are disproportionately located in areas with disadvantaged populations. We will also be doing a needs and barriers assessment, looking specifically at transit infrastructure. So that being not only transit facilities, like brick and mortar facilities, but also transit buses, transit bus stops, as well as the infrastructure to get to the bus stop. We'll also be looking at opportunities to reduce carbon footprint through bus electrification. The big question that we want to answer here is what will it cost to upgrade the entire statewide transit fleet to battery electric buses? We'll be looking at strategies to prioritize the implementation of emerging technologies. We'll also be looking at opportunities to enhance passenger and employee safety. So taking what we've learned from COVID and seeing if there are any opportunities to extend those policies and procedures long term. And then last but not least, we'll be developing a framework for identifying and engaging disadvantaged populations and underserved communities. Again, trying to understand how to best include them in the decision-making process. So here's just a quick overview of the study process and the timeline. We've broken the study into 3 primary phases. First phase being data collection, which we have completed. We are now in our baseline conditions phase. And highlighted in red, we have 2 study deliverables that were identified in House Joint Resolution 542. The first one is coming up next month. We have our interim study report, which is due to the General Assembly.
As we move into the new year, we will be moving on to our action planning phase. And in August of 2022, we will be submitting a final study report to the General Assembly. So with each of these phases, we have a number of study activities that have been either completed or have already started. Just to name a few, in our data collection phase, we've reviewed dozens of plans, policies, and data, anything ranging from Title VI plans, public participation plans, to GIS data, bus stop design guidelines, service design guidelines, really whatever we could get our hands on, we've tried to take a look at it. A few months ago, we administered and completed a transit agency survey. We developed 50 questions relevant to the study, distributed those questions out to all of our transit agencies in Virginia, and we received a 100% response rate on that survey. We've also conducted a series of rider focus groups. So here we actually got to talk directly to transit riders and understand what their needs are. And then we've also developed some marketing material and distributed that to all of our transit agencies to help us raise awareness of the study. For the baseline conditions phase, we have done a number of activities. We have assembled a transit equity committee, which is our advisory committee for the study. This committee includes 12 transit agency CEOs and executives throughout the Commonwealth. We have representation from small, medium, and large transit agencies on that committee. And they've met once thus far, and I believe they're meeting for a second time next week. We've assembled technical working groups for each of those topic areas that I mentioned. Those technical working groups have transit agency staff and industry partners, including VDOT. We have VAMPO included on those working groups. We also have some national representatives from industry experts on those working groups. And they have met one or two times already and will continue to meet throughout the study development process. We have regular stakeholder meetings just to check in with our various stakeholders to give them an update on the study process and solicit input. And then we're also doing agency briefings such as this one throughout the Commonwealth. Upcoming, as I mentioned earlier, starting very soon, we will be moving into action planning. Next month, we have that interim study report that's due to the General Assembly. Sometime this spring, we will be holding a virtual transit equity forum to raise awareness of transit equity. And then next August 22, we will be submitting that final report to the General Assembly. So quickly, I wanted to just give you all some initial themes that we've uncovered during our analyses and our outreach. First and foremost, equity can be incorporated more in our state guidance requirements and funding programs for public transit. There's definitely an opportunity to enhance equity through those programs and policies. Many bus stops are poorly placed and not well connected to the sidewalk network. Probably not surprising to this group. Additionally, basic transit infrastructure such as shelters, benches, and lighting is lacking. Most transit agencies do not have rider advisory boards or committees. That one was fairly surprising to us. There is a significant interest from our transit agencies to electrify their fleets and adopt newer transit technologies, but additional resources are required. So not only funding, which is a big issue with electrifying fleet, but also there were concerns about having a skilled workforce, receiving training from manufacturers, as well as getting technical assistance, whether that be through looking at necessary utility upgrades or how an electric bus may fit into an operations plan. And then lastly, many transit agencies are interested in piloting zero fare service to overcome barriers to transit access. This is one that we continue to hear about from our transit agencies, that they're more interested in these zero fare programs.
So we'll close just quickly by going over the study action plan and potential impacts. As I mentioned, we're in baseline conditions right now. We are also drafting our interim study report, and those two reports, baseline conditions and interim study, will inform the development of a study action plan. The study action plan will include specific recommendations and strategies that address barriers by topic area. We'll also describe actions, next steps, any coordination required, the timeline for implementation, and any responsible agencies. I mentioned this earlier on, but DRPT is anticipating that this study action plan will advise some fairly significant changes to our funding programs and policies and the development of future plans. So we do have a study website. I encourage all of you to check it out. It is vatransitequity.com. And you can sign up for our distribution list by going to that website. And we will be periodically posting new information on that website as well. That is my last slide, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Carl?
As far as I think the presentation looks very interesting, looking forward to the study. I think you might also want to look at what Hampton Roads Transit is doing locally in our area with their regional network. I think they're addressing a lot of those equity issues that were listed, including adding additional bus shelters and other improvements at the bus stop. So just might want to consider that when you do your studies and see what we're doing here in this region.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment. And I will say that this region is actually probably a little bit better than other regions in terms of the sidewalk connectivity to bus stops and the amenities at the bus stops. But we'll definitely take a look at that. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question also. And I noticed on your data collection slide, you gave the percentage of response from the survey. I missed that. What was that percentage again?
The survey, it went out to all 39 transit agencies in the Commonwealth, and all 39 responded.
Okay.
So it was a 100% response rate.
Okay. All right.
I had a question as well. Can you talk a little bit about the efforts that you've made to reach out to communities in need as far as rural areas that actually don't have transit agencies but still have transit and public transit needs?
Yeah, that's a really hard one, to be honest. So first, we're doing our gap assessment. So we're still in the process of understanding where the gaps in transit service exist. So we can't really do any outreach yet to those communities until we understand where they are. But that is going to be a significant challenge for us, and we're currently talking about the best way to do that. I mean, we do have resources through the PDCs and the MPOs where we can potentially leverage those connections. Our transit agencies, many of them are familiar with the gaps in transit service, and they know those communities fairly well. So we do, once we get through that gap assessment, we want to talk to the transit agencies about the challenges that they face extending into those communities. And just get a better understanding of the barriers to extending transit service, specifically in the rural areas.
Were there any other questions or comments? Thank you. I think we're looking at a presentation from HRT.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Sink, Director of Transit Development at HRT, and I'm going to brief you today on our Peninsula VRT project and the Vehicle Solution Norfolk Transit Corridor project. So starting on the Peninsula, we are working on a documented categorical exclusion for the Peninsula VRT project. You can see the alignment here on your screen. It's primarily along Jefferson Avenue and Mercury Boulevard in the cities of Hampton and Newport News. Kind of the biggest update probably is that we had both cities adopt a formal LPA, or local preferred alternative, endorsing this alignment and BRT as the preferred mode. And we are working on that environmental review process. Over the summer, we were doing a lot of work for Section 106, trying to determine, if there were potential effects to historic properties along the alignments. We had a bit of a schedule slippage there, trying to get access to some properties, like an old theater and a church. Just due to COVID, those weren't being used, and sometimes it was difficult to get someone to come out on site and let us in the door to do our surveying. We did have one property that there was a potential effect on, it was the Auto Muffler King on Jefferson Avenue. So we worked with the City of Newport News to move the proposed station that was at Jefferson and Briarfield about 800 feet south to avoid impacting that property. Where that leaves us is we're currently working with FTA to get a letter to SHPO, kind of cross our T's and dot our I's on the historic resources side of things, and then we're anticipating finishing up and getting a CE approved by FTA in the spring. That's kind of all I have to update on Peninsula right now. I will note we don't intend to immediately move forward this project after completion of the documented CE. I think at this time the cities want to kind of wait and see before committing to this kind of large capital investment. But I wanted to pause and see if anyone had any questions on the Peninsula side before we delve into the Norfolk project.
Sam, I did have one question. I noticed this route doesn't touch 64 at all. Is that the intent not to ever touch 64, or? Because I know one time before we did talk about a route along 64.
Yeah, so that was set aside in the previous Peninsula Corridor study. We weren't quite getting the cost effectiveness in terms of the ridership we were seeing. I think, in the future, if we were to implement this and, it performed well, there's always an option to extend, north towards Denby. There was a lot of community interest in that and connecting to Fort Eustis, and, also kind of east and south, further into Hampton and serve HU, the VA, potentially Fort Monroe, and maybe have a BRT connection across the water. But, that would be reserved for future study. Okay, well, hearing no other questions, I'm going to subject you to a lot of slides on the Naval Station Norfolk project. So this study process, we began in late 2019, doing a two-tiered evaluation to identify an initial recommended alternative to connect the eastern end of the existing tied light rail to Naval Station Norfolk. We'd be doing a thorough environmental review of that initial recommended alternative, and then once we have an initial recommended alternative, we would be advancing it through the environmental review process and get to an LPA. It's kind of the ultimate study goal here. So those tier 1 and 2 evaluations, we started with 18 segments across 3 geographical areas. We defined some qualitative and quantitative measures to compare the segments against one another and made sure that they all kind of supported that project purpose and need that was identified early on of increased mobility choice and improving access throughout the region. And then we wanted to recommend a reduced number of segments that create full end-to-end alternatives that we would take into tier 2, and then sort of do a more in-depth look at similar qualitative and quantitative measures and kind of add in that cost and ridership piece that we don't really get a chance to look at in tier 1. So in tier 1, these were the different segments that we looked at. You can see those 3 geographical areas, A, B, and C. The 2 stations at the eastern end of the tie that we looked at connecting to, the Military Highway Station, the Newtown Road Station, and kind of middle of the corridor. We looked at connections to the airport and segments along Military Highway, Sewell's Point Road and Chesapeake Boulevard. And then kind of in the northern section of the study area, we looked at different ways to connect to either the main gate or gate 4, the naval station. And we took the highest ranking segments in each of these areas and connected them together to kind of get these end-to-end alternatives that we looked at in Tier 2. You can see those here on the map. We have 2 alternatives starting at Military Highway Station, 2 alternatives starting at Newtown Road Station, and then 2 of those serve Gate 4 and 2 serve Main Gate. Also, can't believe I haven't mentioned this yet, but we were looking at both BRT and light rail as modes that we were considering, and we carried both modes into Tier 2, so both were still under consideration here. As part of the Tier 2 analysis, we also kind of devised some circulators, one to the airport, one internal to the naval station, and one external from the naval station main gate that would go and serve naval or NSA. To kind of, meet that transit need where we couldn't, the Navy doesn't want us inside the gate with light rail or BRT necessarily. And we found in Tier 1 that it would be very difficult to serve the airport directly because of some environmental factors. We also found through some survey data that we wouldn't get a lot of ridership from serving the airport directly. So we felt the circulator was best to make that connection. The results of that Tier 2 analysis are shown here. Kind of overall, the scores were really close, especially on things like employment, population served, those kind of factors. But the real differentiators were cost and ridership. You can see in the table here, BRT, we're looking at capital costs in the range of $400 million for ridership of 2,700 to 3,500 average weekday passengers. Light rail, you were closer to 900 million, and you were getting weekly ridership of 6,600 to 11,000 boardings. And I want to note that all those costs are 2020 dollars, and the O&M costs shown do include those 3 circulators that I spoke about earlier. So looking at those numbers, none of those alternatives are really a slam dunk. You can kind of have cheaper BRT and less ridership, or more expensive LRT and more ridership. But we didn't feel that either of them quite fulfilled that invest responsibly part of our purpose and need statement. So we kind of looked at ways we could do some additional analysis to kind of further suss out what a good initial recommended alternative would be. On the light rail side, we thought achieving a 1-seat ride from downtown to the military circle redevelopment site would be important to the city's redevelopment plans. So maybe we wanted to consider a tied extension just to military circle. So we did some additional analysis on that. On the BRT side, we thought it had potential, but it still needed some refinement. We used the exact same station spacing for light rail and BRT when we were evaluating them against each other in Tier 2, so we could do kind of an apples to apples comparison. But BRT, you typically see closer station spacing, so we thought it would be fair to go ahead and, in this additional analysis, use half-mile station spacing instead of a mile station spacing. So we added, I believe, 4 additional stations and looked at the ridership and cost impacts of that. Also on the BRT side, we, kind of have in the back of our head, we're going to be beginning a Chesapeake corridor study early next year to look at high-capacity transit options for connecting Greenbrier to other parts of the region. And, just kind of looking at the densities we see in Chesapeake, we don't want to presuppose anything, but it makes sense that BRT could be one of the alternatives that comes out of there. Military Highway is a key corridor connecting Chesapeake to the rest of the region. So there's a potential to maybe after that Chesapeake study is done, be looking at a more regional BRT line kind of connecting up and down Military Highway. So we thought it might be prudent to also kind of wait and see what comes out of that. So, our analysis on the light rail side showed that we could extend to Military Circle and get about 2,000 additional weekday boardings. For some context, that would represent about a 40% increase from our FY19 light rail boardings. So that's pretty substantial, and we could do that at a cost of about $225 million in FY20 dollars. So that is, of course, that's preliminary, but that is a lot more cost effective than nearly $1 billion for 11,000 riders. So we wanted to say that that would be our initial recommended alternative or a first phase of extending high capacity transit off the tide. And that would be a tide light rail extension up to the military circle redevelopment site from Newtown Road Station. But we're kind of reserving BRT to the naval station as sort of a phase 2 that we'll evaluate further in the future after we see what comes out of Chesapeake. So you can kind of see those two projects here on the map. The inset is probably the more important one. That's got the initial recommended alternative of light rail to military circle. It's a roughly 2-mile extension, and that will serve a stop at Centerley Hospital, as well as the military circle redevelopment site. So our next step in the study process is to begin the environmental clearance process. FTA has issued us a recommended class of action of an EA for environmental assessment. So we plan to begin that in January. That might slip to February. We're still talking with FTA about kind of the strategy of exactly when we want to start that NEPA clock. That is the current plan. And so, all along we've been trying to do some public engagement, get people's opinions on this, their input, and also kind of educate them about the study process. Back in February 2020, we did a big round of public engagement in the before times when we could have open houses and real public meetings. We focused on how people thought we should connect to the tide, how we should serve the airport, how we could serve the naval station. We set up some advisory committees. We did some pop-up events, a lot of website, social media stuff, and we got really good response from that. And then we kind of, took a break from public engagement while we were going through those 2 tiers of analysis to kind of whittle things down to that initial recommended alternative. And beginning in late September through Sunday, we began a second round of public engagements, which was focused primarily on virtual engagement via the website instead of a virtual meeting, where we had kind of a story map, and a virtual survey they could take. We did a social media campaign to kind of push that. We also did 3 pop-up meetings at HRT transit centers to make sure that we're reaching our existing customers. And we've also been doing a big push with direct contact with businesses, employers along the corridor, trying to make them aware of the study and understand what their questions and concerns might be at this stage. To try and make sure that we can incorporate anything they want us to incorporate now rather than later when it's much more expensive to do so. So going forward, we'll be working to set up civic league meetings, task force meetings, kind of get with other community groups to try and reach more people. We're going to continue coordinating with the Navy, our partners at the City of Norfolk. We've been engaging regularly with the city's Department of Development to understand their plans at Military Circle, make sure that we're a part of those. And of course, we'll keep putting out newsletters and popping up tables wherever we can at community events. So where that leaves us in the project timeline, so that tide light rail extension to Military Circle is our initial recommended alternative. It's the purple part right there, fall 2021. As I mentioned, we'll begin doing that EA in January or February, and we hope to have those environmental or the results of the environmental review in spring of 2020, enough so that we can make a smart scale application for this cycle. And then by fall 2022, we hope to have a formal locally preferred alternative for the project. So with that, are there any questions?
Any comments or questions? None? Thank you. Yep. that's one of our regular presentations. In your agenda, you'll see the 3-month tentative schedule listed. And on that list, you'll see that we're currently planning for our December regular meeting to be canceled. And if we're still on track for that to happen. Which then we won't have our regular, this is our regular November meeting, so we won't have a meeting next month, so everybody in the new year. For your information has a few items. And then under announcements, I believe we do have a couple announcements. Carol has something that you wanted to share with us.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see, is Ron Hodges and Emily Katz here? Well, would mind please standing up. Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's just my pleasure to announce that Ron and Emily attended a conference this summer for the Association of Commuter Transportation in Disney. They braved the Delta variant to go there and received 2 very prestigious international awards. One award was for being an outstanding TMA organization, as well as a second award for commuting options for providing an exemplary program that promotes trip reductions and modal shifts. So I just wanted to give them both a round of applause. For Keep in mind, these are international awards too, so we're not just talking about the U.S., talking about other countries as well. And I also wanted to give a special recognition to Emily Cass, who this fall received an award at the Virginia Transit Association, the Unsung Hero Award. So thank you, Emily, for getting that award. We appreciate all the hard work that you do. And if you'd like to learn more about this award-winning organization, please join us right after TTAC for the traffic committee meeting, which I think will be right here in the same room immediately after. Oh, are we meeting in another room, Rob?
So last time.
That's fine.
Okay, all right, so we will be here in this room?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so that's all I have, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. Were there any other specific announcements other than what's in your agenda? Sorry.
Okay.
The traffic meeting will be in 757.
Yes, because that's what it says on the calendar, so in case there's somebody in here who's coming, they'll be looking for it over there, so we'll be over there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 19, new or old business. TPO staff, we'd like to go ahead, if anyone had any comments or discussion that we'd like to have regarding the meeting setup. Over the last 2 months, we've had a couple different options regarding how the room is set up, how the table is set up. If staff wants to go ahead and lead a discussion about the options that we put on the table or how we work the meetings, if anyone had any feedback on that.
Yeah, I think as we noted last month, we tried one setup, but based on the feedback we received, we did it a little differently this time. Just trying it out, we are hoping, and any feedback you might have, please let us know. Kathleen does a lot of the work here trying to get our room set up, so anything you can do to give us feedback or things we can do better, or this works, that's fine. So if you don't have any comments right now, you can send us a note back to the meeting. We just wanted to make sure you took your feedback into account.
One note for voting members, the localities aren't required to have a single consensus vote amongst their constituent members. Having only one voting member here could lead to some potential issues where you would have a split vote amongst the delegation.
I was under the impression that, even though there's one representative at the table, if the other voting members are sitting in the chairs, they can still vote.
But then
That was my impression, but I could be wrong.
No, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, we just, voting members are all here, we just are trying to spread them out around the table, so if there is somebody in the back who wants to vote, they definitely, yeah, sorry.
Well, when I got here, it was sent away, that wasn't made all.
That's something we'll make sure to be clarified the next time.
Jamie, I would say, we're gonna not meet next month in December. The time we get back in January, we should have a really strong indication of what's going on. If our numbers continue to drop like they appear to be doing now, I think it's time to get back to normal. Bring everybody back to the table, go back to meeting like we've done in the past. If someone desires to wear a mask, they're certainly welcome to. But we've been divided too long. It's time to bring everybody back to the table. That's my personal opinion.
Hi, so I was just gonna say, I understand trying to thin out the room, but it doesn't make any logical sense to me to then have the non-voting members, the majority of them, to kind of be grouped really tightly over there. Like, if we want to thin out the room, then we should space everyone, behind like this. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, I understand the intention, but I would prefer just to see everyone at the table, personally.
Anyone else have some feedback, thoughts, input? We can also just, any other thoughts, we can email TPO staff, get some more feedback. But is there any other old or new business anyone wanted to bring up? Well, if there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.